Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving into the gritty, fascinating, and frankly, sometimes deadly reality of historic London porter brewing. We often romanticize the past, right? We picture these quaint little taverns and super simple brewing methods. But the actual truth about London's historic breweries? It was far more industrial, massively scaled, and incredibly dangerous.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Just picture this for a second. You're walking down a street in 19th century London, and suddenly, out of nowhere, a colossal 570-ton tsunami of black beer crashes through a solid brick wall right toward you, just sweeping absolutely everything away in its path. I mean, it sounds like a bizarre movie plot, right? But this actually happened. So, to even wrap our heads around how a disaster like that could occur, we really have to look at the sheer terrifying scale of London's breweries at the time. 18,000. That is the barrel capacity of a single giant brewing vat at Meux's Horseshoe Brewery in the early 1800s. To meet this immense demand for beer, their engineering had to be pushed to its absolute and sometimes fatal limits.
All right, let's start with Section 1, London's massive porter boom.
So this immense thirst for porter, which was a really strong, heavily hopped, dark beer that was super popular with the working class, it completely transformed local breweries into these sprawling industrial complexes. Just listen to this incredibly vivid quote from a visitor back in 1812. She wrote, "In Muir's brewery, everything is as filthy as steam and smoke, except the steam engine, which is as polished and as clean as the bars of a drawing room grate." So yeah, this definitely wasn't a cozy artisanal workshop. This was a roaring, smoky factory.
And the sheer cost and weight of what they were building, it was just staggering. You see, porter had to be stored for months to really develop its sought-after flavor, and that required massive storage vats. Some of these towering wooden beasts cost up to 10,000 pounds back then, which is, equivalent to a massive fortune today. And they were literally held together by iron hoops weighing 80 tons. The physical risk of storing millions of pints of liquid that high up above the ground was just extraordinary. Which brings us to Section 2, harnessing steam power. So you might be wondering, how on earth did they process these gargantuan quantities of liquid? Well, a major technological revolution took place. Let's see how this builds. In 1784, the very first steam engine in London was installed at the Red Lion Brewery. Fast forward to 1791, and brewers like Richard Hare were patenting complex steam capture and hop oil apparatuses. And by 1805, massive beam engines were being installed at places like Truman's Brewery. This rapid industrialization was nothing short of a total technological revolution. Now, before this era, human muscle did literally all the work. Mashes were physically stirred by sturdy men wielding these incredibly long oars. But steam power, it completely took over the industry. We're talking about 26 horsepower polished steam engines mechanically stirring gigantic 28-foot vats. This relentless new power of steam allowed production to just skyrocket, leaving manual labor completely in the dust.
Moving right along to Section 3, patent wars and tax evasion.
Now, with those high stakes and huge profits came fierce competition, actual corporate espionage, and some incredibly bitter legal battles. Brewers fiercely protected these very expensive innovations. Remember Richard Hare? Well, he patented his steam and hop oil capture apparatus in 1791, and he started charging rivals £100 a year just to use it. But it turned out another brewer named Thomas Sutton Wood had actually invented a very similar system way back in 1785. So by 1803, the courts completely invalidated Hare's patent. It was basically an outright corporate war over steam technology. Now, what's really fascinating here is the sheer scale of the cheating going on. Richard Hare was hit with huge penalties in 1786. We're talking £800 for unpaid duty and £200 for, get this, literally building illegal underground pipes to hide beer from the taxmen, plus more fines for using illegal ingredients like molasses and a burnt sugar coloring called essentia bina. I mean, they went to absolute extremes to evade taxes and hide their massive production numbers.
And that leads us right into Section 4, the Great Beer Flood.
All of this immense industrial scale, these massive towering vats, the underground evasion, it all eventually reached a terrifying climax at Meux's Horseshoe Brewery on October 17, 1814, when the physical limits of their engineering failed catastrophically. 571. That is the exact tonnage of the 3,555 barrels of aging porter that violently burst from a single 22-foot high vat that afternoon. The sheer weight and force of that much liquid suddenly letting loose is just, it's hard to even comprehend. We actually have an account from an eyewitness who barely escaped. They reported, "A roar as of falling buildings at a distance and suffocating fumes were in my ears and nostrils." This was literally a 15-foot-high tsunami of black beer. It didn't just spill over. It smashed right through the brewery's heavy brickback wall and crashed into the impoverished St. Giles tenements behind it, sweeping people out of rooms and utterly destroying houses in an instant.
Now, the gap between internet myths and historical reality here is incredibly stark. You might have seen wild stories about this event online. Besotted mobs drinking from the gutters, riots in hospitals, or floors collapsing under crowds of onlookers. Actually, none of that is true. The historical facts are much, much more somber. Rescuers actually worked in complete dead silence so they could hear the groans of survivors trapped under the rubble. Ultimately, there were 8 tragic casualties, mostly women and children who were trapped in their flooded basements or swept away by the sudden current.
So how exactly does a massive mechanical failure like this happen? Well, about an hour before the disaster, a 700-weight iron hoop simply popped and fell off the vat. The clerk actually thought nothing of it because apparently it happened 2 or 3 times a year. But under the unyielding pressure of that aging beer, the vat's rivet slipped. The whole structure gave way as completely as a dropped teacup. Ultimately, the coroner simply ruled the deaths as casualty, accidentally, and by misfortune. The engineering of the time just couldn't safely contain their ambition. Finally, Section 5. Operational hazards and fires.
Because the Great Flood wasn't just some isolated freak risk. Daily operations in these facilities were terrifyingly dangerous. These big breweries were situated in really dense, highly industrialized neighborhoods, which made fire a constant, looming threat. There was this frequent danger from nearby lucifer, or phosphorus match factories, catching fire. In fact, in 1841, a huge fire completely destroyed a factory right behind Truman's Brewery. Because the risk was so extraordinarily high, these big breweries literally had to maintain and daily rely on their own private fire engines just to protect their massive wooden vats and boiling coppers from going up in smoke.
And then there were the invisible hazards lurking inside the brewery itself. During fermentation, immense quantities of carbonic acid gas, which was what we know today as carbon dioxide, rested just on the surface of the beer. And how did workers detect this poisonous vapor? Not with modern sensors, that's for sure. They used their bare hands. They would reach down until they felt the thick, warm sensation of the deadly gas. I mean, one slip, one deep breath could easily be fatal.
And the structural near misses, they just kept happening. In 1817, so this is just 3 years after the Great Beer Flood, a surveyor at Truman's Brewery noticed a massive vat, filled to the brim with actively fermenting beer, was actually sinking into the floor. Its iron supporting pillars were literally giving away. They had to drain it immediately, because if it had fallen, it would have knocked down the steam engines, the coppers, and probably destroyed the entire brewery. They were constantly pushing these towering structures to the absolute brink of collapse.
Which really brings us to a final thought. Next time you enjoy a pint, will you consider the hidden industrial history and the human cost behind its creation? We so often romanticize the history of beer, but the reality was a brutal, fascinating mix of rapid technological evolution, incredible engineering ambition, and tragic industrial accidents. The very same steam-powered leap that allowed breweries to produce millions of pints also brought immense dangers right to the doorsteps of everyday people. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the history behind the everyday things around you, and I will see you next time.